Okay, so for this part of the game, we're going to look at the enemy. So the enemy is going to be just like another player. We can always put, sprites and animations on this stuff later on. We're not going to cover that in this tutorial series. It's probably a different one. It's probably too much to go through, to be honest. So let's look at that separately. It's something you could always map in on top of this existing game or whatever game you're building, maybe while watching these tutorials. So the enemy works on what's called a nav mesh system. So let's look at the nav mesh first, and we'll see exactly what it is and how we're going to create one. So the nav mesh is part of this window system over here. So you go to Window, AI, Navigation. Now, in older versions of Unity, you might have just navigation in here somewhere, okay? So it's just the navigation window you're looking for. This might actually be on by default in whatever version you're on as well. So in here, we're going to bake what's called a nav mesh. A nav mesh is like a very simplified mesh that sits inside your world or your level and describes the walkable or traversable area that's known to your artificially intelligently driven characters like NPCs or enemy bots, or even just system bots or whatever. So the nav mesh is something that you have to bake. So you have to pick the actual area that you want to bake your nav mesh in. So we're going to go into our level and we're going to pick all of the rooms. Now what I'm hoping is that it will actually bake the nav mesh onto the floor here and not, this is something else I didn't consider, so I'm hoping that it'll actually bake it internally inside here and not onto the surface or the top of the level here. Okay, so I've picked all of the areas that I want to be traversable in the level. I've said that they are navigation static, and we've got generate off mesh links. We don't need those for now. And then we click onto the bake settings. Our agent height is 2. Let's make that. Let's make it 0.5, just in case they can't fit inside the actual tunnel area that we've defined. It should be fine. I think it's 2 meters tall. And then we've got the slope height. So this is the maximum slope that they can climb. So we don't have to worry about that. These are the actual angles and heights and everything here, because we're not actually climbing anything. Steps, we don't have any of those, but that would be the individual step height. So what kind of a step, basically the height of a step, what can we actually clear? And then you don't need to worry about any of this kind of stuff, but if I click on bake, let's see what actually gets generated. Okay, that's interesting. So it has actually dug its way through here, but due to the radius of our agent, which is set at 0.5, it can't actually negotiate these paths here. It's thinking that it's too tight. So this 0.5 is literally to stop parts of your agent or bot or AI controlled unit clipping into certain areas. So if we make that a little bit smaller, make the radius substantially smaller, I'm hoping that when we bake again, yeah, there we go. So it says that, yeah, if it's that thin or the radius is thinner, then this is the actual area that it can traverse or walk around, which is great. So out of the box, it's done that for us. It's on the base level. Fantastic. Okay, great. So moving on, that's our world. So that is the fishbowl for our goldfish to swim in, basically. All right, so that's the world that our AI knows about. And if we zoom in real close, you can see that there's the radius. See that the distance between the nav mesh itself and the outer wall, or the nav mesh itself and this part of the floor, right here and here. So that's the allowance or tolerance it's given to the bot to say, look, you can't walk any closer to the wall, otherwise you'll be sinking into it. Your mesh will actually push into the wall itself. So you've got to be careful and mindful of that when you're actually using proper 3D characters in your game. That if they're carrying big weapons or guns, you got to specify the radius of your agent and say that it that it encompasses this entire area. So you got to keep that in mind, so that parts of their armor or guns or whatever don't sink into walls when they're standing too close. Okay, so that's baked. That's all we have to do there. The next part is we actually create our enemy bot. So we don't need that level anymore. Let's create ourselves another. Do you know what? Let's make a cube. let's make this into a cube just to make it a little bit different. And I'm going to put the enemy in this room here. And I'm going to change its material because that white is just crazy. And I'm going to make it a little bit thinner, so maybe 0.5 in scale. 0.5 that way. Keep the same height just for the crack. It's kind of cuboid character. And let's give it another material. Let's make it kind of a reddish or green, maybe kind of like a zombie green, kind of puce color. So let's call this enemy. And we'll drag that onto the cube, which is our enemy. Let's change the name of that, enemy. And yeah, okay, that's all good. All materials, that's all fine. We got a box collider, that's fine. Cool. Now we could change this enemy material. Let's change the color to something a little bit. Yeah, there we go. Something kind of greeny, horrible. That'll actually kind of glow and reflect. Hey, do you know what? Let's make these guys radioactive. Let's say that they're emissive, so they create their own little light source. Global illumination. Let's make it real time so that they actually cast lighting where they walk. That'd be interesting. So somewhere up here in this green zone, kind of glowing zombies. That's kind of cool. Radioactive. Yeah, I like that. Alright. Yeah. Some of you might think this is getting a little bit hard to see. I tend to go overboard with effects, so, you know, flavor this as you like, as you see fit. I'm just going to, mash all this stuff in here just to give you an idea of what you can do. So that's our enemy kind of blocked out, ready to go. It needs to know about the nav mesh, right? So the component that drives the connection between an object and the actual nav mesh is the nav mesh agent. So you want to add component nav mesh agent. So basically this connects this cube, this enemy cube, this glowing cube, with this navigable area around here. All right. Right. So the nav mesh agent, yes. So we need to actually script that so that it'll actually chase the player. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a script. Create a C# script called enemy. I'm going to attach that to our enemy. It hasn't finished compiling yet. There we go. And open it up. So just like we did with the rigid body before, we need to create a reference to our NavMesh agent component and tell it what to do. But the thing is, with Unity, NavMesh agents and other things like user interfaces and other script libraries aren't made readily accessible all the time. So something like a rigid body is used a lot. So they're always made accessible through these libraries of code up here. But sometimes you actually have to pull in your own library in order to get access to some of the more obscure things like, say, a NavMesh agent. So how you do that is you say using Unity engine.ai. So if you ever find yourself typing something in, let me show you actually, I'll cut that out. If you ever find yourself typing something in that you know is correct, like NavMesh agent, well, there's no predictive system saying, hey, look, here's your NavMesh agent, right? Whereas if I start typing rigid body, there, look, the option is there straight away. It knows what I'm talking about. Look what happens when I actually pull the library in, though. If I say pulling in AI and I start typing nav, there it is, NavMesh agent. And I call this agent, by the way. So if you ever find yourself typing something like that in and you can't figure out what it is, go to the Unity documentation and they will tell you what library each of these are actually, one of these belongs to. So you could have copied some code from somewhere and you forgot to actually put in the library. It's such a common mistake. This is what gives you access to these NavMesh agents. Later on, when we discuss the actual canvas and our user interface and the feedback for our player, we're going to have to pull in using Unity Engine.UI user interface. Okay, so just bear that in mind. Cool. So in our start function, we have to assign to the agent what it is. So agent is equal to get component. We're able to get this component because it's attached to our enemy. Get component navmesh agent. And then we need to say, hey agent, which is basically your navmesh control, we want you to chase after the player. So this enemy needs to know about the player. So public game object player. So inside the update, constantly we're going to say agent.set destination, which is telling the navmesh agent to go to player.transform.position, the position of our player. Okay, and check out what happens when we do that. Okay, let's go to, where are we? Our enemy. We need to actually drop in the reference to our player. Don't forget we dropped this enemy script on, but it doesn't know who our player is. So we need to put the player reference inside here. Let's drag the player in. Cool. And then let's hit play. Okay, so we're just walking around, minding our business. Oh my god, there we go. And it's pushed us right off the map. So for starters, that is really fast. Okay, so let's change that up a little bit. I'm going to actually move my scene view down here. Up here actually, like so. And I'm going to keep my game view down here, so I can see two things happening at once. So I can see what's happening in the game, and I can also see what's happening in the scene. So my enemy is way too fast. If I go into my navmesh control, yeah, the speed is 3.5. And don't forget that we actually made the scale of everything 0.5. So it's moving really, really quickly. Let's make that 1. And then let's watch this and see what happens. There we go. So you can see that our enemy is able to figure out how to walk around corners. It's using a navmesh to do that. And here we have our view of our game. So look, we're walking around. And, oh, here he is. So he's probably set to the exact same speed as us. So that's kind of creepy. And look, his glow is actually lighting up the hallway, which is kind of cool as well. In fact, it's moving a lot more efficiently than I am. It's gaining on me quickly. Cool. Right, so there. It's going to keep trying to get into the position that I'm in, okay? Which is something we have to stop. So let's just say for now, instead of just constantly moving towards our position, let's say that if the distance between the enemy and the player is greater than a certain number, then we move towards the player. So if vector3, that's where I use the vector3 class again, distance between transform.position, which is enemy position because it's the enemy script, and player.transform.position, if that is greater than 1.5 f, then we want to go to that position. So watch what happens now. So let's bear in mind that we are basically, the enemy and the player are both 50 centimeters across. So we'll come and reach that point, and there we go. So it's reached that point and said, yep, I've had enough. And then as soon as we move away, it should start chasing us again. So I'm thinking we will stop at a certain distance. That's actually an issue right there. See that stopping speed? It's actually not stopping fast enough. So let's look at our speed is set to 1. Acceleration and stopping distance. Why is that actually? Stopping distance, acceleration. Let's make that way less. Make that 2 maybe. Let's see if the enemy can stop sooner. Might need to go the opposite way with that. Let's check it out. Yeah, that was worse. So acceleration, maybe that needs to be twice. I wonder if it's the stopping distance. I think part of this problem is the fact that we're working at kind of like half the scale as we normally would. Yeah. So the idea is if the distance... Ah, I got it. Sorry. That's a problem. Yeah, that makes sense. So I'm not thinking straight here, guys. Sorry. So let's leave the acceleration where it was. Leave that at 8. And then we didn't say what we want to do if the distance is less than or equal to 1.5. We just said keep going, and then we didn't say what else to do. So else agent.set destination to transform dot position. So basically set your destination to where you are. So basically stop, right? So let's check that out. Here we go. So this could be somewhere like, where the enemy starts attacking or something. That could probably be a shorter distance. Let's make that half, so we can say 0.75. Here we go. Let's try that out. Okay. On we go, and yeah, it stops just about there. So maybe this could be like it starts spitting acid at you, or swiping with some claws or something like that. So when it hits that distance, so it'll always chase you up until that point. We should probably make the player slightly faster than the enemy, just to give you a chance. But we're going to do some sort of a shotgun or some sort of a weapon here, where we shoot some sort of a bullet, and we're going to deal with that in the next part of the tutorial. Okay, thanks guys.